Hey there, it's the VC Andrews critiquer again. Well, not long ago, I released the final part of my old versus new comparison of Flowers in the Attic. I had originally planned for this to be a one-time journey into video making, but I just had so much fun making the videos, I figured, why stop now? And decided to find another story to do an old versus new on. Then I discovered the two film adaptations of the first ever Stephen King novel, Carrie. I had never read the book or seen either film before, but I heard the story had similar characters and themes to Flowers in the Attic. Hell, some of the characters even share names like Chris and Carrie, and thus it sounded like a logical choice for a follow-up. So I watched both the original and the remake back to back with fresh eyes, and I enjoyed them both. But I also picked a winner pretty quickly. Now, just as a heads up, this video is just going to be a 24-minute one-parter. Being very similar in nature, I wasn't able to find as many things to compare for the two movies as I could for Flowers in the Attic. And also note that I've never read the original book before, so I'm basing this comparison solely on which ones I like better, not how faithful to the source material it is. And finally, just remember that all of this is opinion-based, and if you don't agree with me, that's perfectly fine. So let's take a look at this dark tale about the dangers of bullying, especially when it's towards someone with telepathic powers, and both figurative and literal hams. This is old versus new, Carrie. Now keep in mind that we're not going to judge Carrie right away. Since she is one of the most important elements of the movie, I thought we should save that for closer to the end. So let's start off with her nutjob mother, Margaret Weitz. It's very coincidental that I chose to do a comparison of the Carrie movies as a follow-up to my Flowers comparison, because this character is actually more similar to Olivia Foxworth than I thought. Both are obsessive religious fanatics who are aloof to their family members due to them being products of incest, and constantly enforce their fanatic religious views on them in ways that go against everything the Bible stands for, before attempting to outright murder them. But what's more, the contrast between both versions of Margaret are very similar to the contrasts of Olivia in both Flowers adaptations. Let's look at Piper Laurie's version first. Laurie portrays Margaret as a woman who appears to be a loving, devoted Christian in public, but behind closed doors is a completely psychotic whack job who won't hesitate for a second to physically and verbally abuse Carrie, to the point where she makes the Westboro Baptist Church look loving by comparison. Julianne Moore portrays the character in a much more sympathetic manner. She is still willing to wrongfully torture her daughter, but clearly has some love in her heart. She comforts Carrie occasionally, and doesn't get nearly as aggressive when disciplining her. Even when she's trying to kill Carrie, she assures her that it's not her fault. Piper just takes sheer pleasure in the whole ordeal. So again, it's like the two versions of Olivia from my Flowers review. One is completely heartless and remorseless, while the other is sympathetic as well as cruel. So which one is better? Well, as much as I admire the direction that Moore took the character, I still enjoy Piper's portrayal much more. She chews more of the scenery in this movie, probably more than John Travolta has in all of his movies combined, either coming off as absolutely terrifying and ruthless,
He was weak. Say it.
absolutely hilarious,
He's gonna laugh at you. They're all gonna laugh at you.
or sometimes both, and that's really hard to pull off. I also feel like the more tragic portrayal hampers her ability to be effectively scary. Moore clearly put some effort into it, but I never really found her all that scary or even that memorable. I liked the performance just fine, but Piper's over-the-top performance won't ever leave my memory, and for that, I think that's more than point-worthy. Point goes to the old.
There will be a judgment.
Ugh. Margaret may not be the most supportive mother, but Carrie does have other supporters in this movie. And some more unsupporters too, unfortunately. I've split them into two categories, so let's start off with the good half, the best supporting cast. In many respects, a tough choice because the supporting casts in both films are very similar. Sue's still Chris's former right-hand gal who has a change of heart and decides to help Carrie by setting her up with her boyfriend Tommy. The gym teacher is still the protective maternal figure who has Carrie's back to the end and will go to extreme lengths to take down anyone who gives Carrie beef, and Tommy's still the popular dude who agrees to take Carrie to the prom because his girlfriend asked him to, but becomes closer with her in the process. But if I absolutely had to pick one, which I do, I think I'd go with the remake, mainly because I just saw a bit more generosity and support coming from them. Sue, for instance, is much quicker to realize the error of her ways and makes an effort to help Carrie when she's freaking out during her period. She even confronts Chris about what a douchebag move it was to torment Carrie like that, and when Chris counterpoints that Sue was only being nice to Carrie to make sure she would still get to go to the prom, this is what prompts her to have Tommy ask her out, wanting to prove that she's genuinely behind Carrie. Sue's change of character in the original feels a little contrived, with little build-up or foreshadowing, but the remake devotes time to show how her hidden heart grows throughout the movie. Hell, even after witnessing Carrie's psychotic rampage at the prom in the remake, she still follows her home and tries to help her. If that's not a true sign of friendship, I don't know what is. There's not too much to compare with Tommy, but he does have a few ways in which he goes above and beyond in the remake. Like, he's the only one who actually defends Carrie's creepy poem in class, implying that he already had some feelings for her, and he actually bothers to get pissed when the pig blood's dropped on Carrie instead of just standing there in shock like the others. I also like how he's portrayed as more socially awkward here instead of as the perfect football stud like in the original. This not only avoids popular kid stereotypes, but also makes the connection he built up with Carrie a bit more believable. I guess the last big one to talk about is the gym teacher. In the original we got Miss Collins, and in the remake we got Miss Desjardins. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to refer to them both as the gym teacher. And again, I'm going to have to go with Judy Greer's version from the new. Why? Well, for one thing, like Tommy and Sue, she goes a bit beyond helping Carrie than Buckley's. Like when she tries to get Carrie to participate in the sporting events with the other girls, and when she uses the video Chris took of Carrie against her by revealing to her Chris's father when he comes to complain about his daughter being banned for the prom, that the video was under her name. And the second reason is, Buckley's version seemed to lean a little too much on the abrasive side to truly come off as the caring maternal figure in Carrie's life. Don't get me wrong, I have nothing against masculinity in females, but I got a little creeped out by how she talks to the girls in her class.
You can choke on it for all I care, just get it out of your mouth.
Yeah, would you let your kids anywhere near this woman if she talked like this? And I know what you're thinking, but they're the wrong girls who humiliated Carrie. They deserve it. She's really kind to Carrie. And for the most part, yes, but sometimes she's almost as bad to Carrie as she is to them. Like when she finds Carrie suffering on her period, she initially tells her to nut up and stop crying. She does soften up once she fully realizes what's going on, but then when she's talking to the principal, she says that she would have done the same thing if she was a teenager and saw Carrie doing that.
See, the whole thing just made me want to take her and shake her too. You know what I mean? It was just her period, for God's sake.
Why would you say that? And then when the principal suggests calling a cab, she's like, nah, she can walk home, she's fine. Does this girl look fine, you dingus? And also near the end of the movie, she lets Carrie down big time. I won't discuss how right away, but let's just say I wasn't crying too hard when Carrie slaughtered her in the prom after what she did. Greer was much more convincingly empathetic. She's kind to Carrie throughout the movie and is responsible with how she treats her. Like, she knows that Carrie's not in a position to walk home after the incident in the locker room, and she doesn't betray Carrie at the end. And while still tough on those who give Carrie beef, it never really gets to the point where child services should be called. Overall, I really like both casts, but I really admire how the characters in the new took that extra step to show kindness to Carrie, and at a time when she probably needed it more than ever. Point goes to the new.
What? I'm gonna knock you down, do you understand me?
But like said before, Carrie also has her share of enemies. So let's find out which set of adversaries is the more worthy opponent by looking at our next category, Best Unsupporting Cast. I guess we should start with our main antagonist and one of the most famous alpha bitches in movie history, Chris Hargensen. It's a safe bet that anyone who would taunt someone who is going through their period and not knowing what it is, and then humiliate them further by dumping pig blood on them in public is a pretty low person. But as to which one is better, I'm going to have to go with Nancy Allen in the original. Why? Well, even though Portia Doubleday's performance definitely captures the character's extreme selfishness and cruelty, Alan's performance just has a slightly more bloodthirsty and sociopathic edge to it, making her all the more memorable and unlikable. Not that Doubleday didn't have this either, but Alan just seems like the more messed up of the two, not just in how she treats Carrie, but also in general. Like in the remake, Chris gets a bit queasy from watching her posse cut up the pig, while in the original, she almost looks like she's having an orgasm watching it. Or when Tommy's killed by the bucket landing on his head during the prom scene, Chris is actually upset about this, while the original, she finds it just as funny as the audience who's laughing their asses off about it. This Chris also seems more cunning and manipulative. Like when her boyfriend Billy's getting tired of the way she treats him, she gets all lusty with him to charm him into helping her with her plans to humiliate Carrie. Doubleday's Chris isn't as clever with her actions. Like when she records a video of Carrie freaking out, she posts it online under her own name. That blows up in her face pretty quickly. But when she's about to humiliate Carrie at the prom, she feels the need to gloat to Sue about it through a text, causing Sue to race to the prom to try and stop her. But what about her boyfriend Billy? Well, both performances are indeed very different. John Travolta portrays him as a laid-back lunk who's easily swayed by his girlfriend's orders, while Alex Russell portrays him as basically a male version of Chris herself, being a cold-blooded sociopathic jock who's just as eager to humiliate Carrie as his girlfriend. He's a decent villain, but I personally enjoy Travolta's more comedic take on the character. His dialogue is pretty funny, which helps provide some comic relief for this really dark story, and he seems more like his own character than just a copy of Chris. I guess the last one to talk about is Chris's right-hand gal, Tina. She doesn't have much personality or dialogue in either version, and is mostly just a living prop to help Chris and to die at the end. But she is slightly more malicious in the original, and the first one to laugh at Carrie when the blood's dropped on her, making her comeuppance all the more satisfying. While I do think both unsupporting casts were great villains for the story, I just found the original more memorable and more callous, making them all the more worthy opponents. Point goes to the old.
God, you guys are such goddamn pussies.
Shut up!
For our second and last round, let's stop talking about the side characters and talk about the prom queen herself, the best Carrie White. I think that most people can agree that Chloe Moretz had a pretty tough act to follow with Sissy Spacek's portrayal of the miserable loner that Carrie is. Her conveyment of Carrie's agony and suffering is just so astounding that you almost forget that she's acting, and it really makes you feel all the more for the character. Now don't get me wrong, Moretz certainly does an admirable job at conveying the anguish too, but in comparison to Spacek...
No, Mommy! Come on, please! No,
Guys, listen to
There's just no contest. But with that said, there is one major problem with Spacek's performance. As great as her misery is on screen, I can't really say the same for her other emotions. It's by no means terrible acting, but I just feel like they kind of took the reclusive introvert aspect a little too far with this version, to the point where it kind of hampers the emotion Carrie's supposed to have in certain sequences. Like, if you were never told that this was the first time Carrie was going to prom, or had even been asked out by a guy in general, you probably never would have guessed it. When Carrie's preparing for the prom or dancing with Tommy, she gives almost no sign that she has never done this before, or that this is really anything even that special. Okay, when she's crowned the prom queen, that reaction is more than fitting of the situation. But aside from that, not so much. Moretz's Carrie seems much more like someone who is experiencing true friendship for the first time, that being a mix of sheer joy, but also a little hesitation and uncertainty. Or when Carrie discovers her telepathic powers, she shows almost no interest in learning more about them. She just reads one sentence from a book in the library explaining what they are, and then is like, meh, neato, must move on. Moretz's Carrie seemed to actually give a shit about her telepathic abilities, what with her reading multiple books and web articles about them with thorough fascination, and actually testing her abilities in secrets. And yes, I know that Carrie is supposed to be a shy and reclusive girl, but if you shut out the emotional range and determination of your lead character too much, there isn't as much you can do with them, and thus they can't be as interesting. Again, Spacek's performance of Agony is amazing and very tragic and sympathetic, but I'm sorry, her performance outside of that seems very basic and restricted. Even though Moretz's performance only conveys a moderate range of emotion in most scenes, I take a wide range of medium emotion over a huge range of just one emotion and a very limited range of the other emotions any day. Now, where Moretz showed strong emotion was during the prom massacre. Spacek mostly keeps the same blank-eyed zombie stare throughout the sequence, which comes off as more creepy than scary. Moretz was not only terrifying, but also had a much wider range of emotions, be it vengeance, sadism, triumph, and some hesitation about how far she should go with her actions. I know that I gave the point to the original Margaret on account of her over-the-top performance, but there is a huge difference between a relatively minor character and your frickin' lead character. I'm sorry, but it's not just one emotion that a great character expresses, no matter how good it is. There has to be a multitude of emotions to keep the audience engaged and to allow them to properly relate to the character. Moretz just had more characterization than just agony and shyness, and thus I found her more relatable and more interesting. Point goes to the new.
Why are you doing this?
It's all tied up, so let's come to our final round. There's really no point in comparing the stories because they're both basically the same, save for a few updates and additional tidbits that the remake offers. And they both tell it really well, so there's really no point, again. So instead, we'll be judging the best atmosphere. One of the biggest differences that the remake has over the original is the decision to update it from the 70s to the new 10s. Was this a good decision? In some ways, yes. Being set in the age of the internet allowed for more possibilities, like Chris to share Carrie's humiliation on YouTube to further humiliate her and to increase the conflict of the story, and Carrie to learn more about her telepathic abilities via several web articles so that she could obtain a better understanding of them than what she could through a schoolbook. But there is one major problem that the story has by being set in present day. While the basic premise of a girl going up against school bullies itself is a pretty timeless one and can work in most settings, it can't quite go as extreme in 2013 as it could in 1976, somewhat hampering the conflict of the story. Because of how different people's attitudes are towards bullying these days, the new version had to be a little safer with how cruel it portrayed the bullying. Now don't get me wrong, we get some pretty depressing stuff, but just look at how much more physical and sadistic the girls are during the infamous "plug it up" scene. The original had the advantage of being set in a time when bullying wasn't nearly as frowned upon, and thus didn't have to be as restrained with its cruelty, making the conflict all the more severe. On top of that, there are also many other things from the original that are considered taboo today, like high school girls hanging out completely naked in locker rooms, and teachers being able to hit students without getting fired. It's components like these that make the movie a bit dated, but also help make the story even more shocking to modern audiences than it was to audiences of the time. I'm not necessarily saying that it was bad that they toned down this stuff for the new version. There's no way any of this stuff would fly in present day. The gym teacher even gets in serious trouble just for using the S word once to a student. But the original's time frame really played a significant part in the shock value that the story offered. But even on its own, the new version isn't as good at shocking us. Even if there wasn't another adaptation in existence that already gave us some idea of what to expect, its way of going about stuff isn't always as effective. Like, let's look at how each film introduces Margaret. The original initially makes Margaret out to be this somewhat obnoxious but overall friendly Christian lady who loves her daughter and just wants to do good. But then after getting a call from the school about the incident in the locker room, that's when she shows her true colors and lets her wrath out on Carrie, making for a pretty good jump scare. The remake introduces her by having her called to come pick Carrie up from the school, and before we see her, we see Carrie getting horrified about this, indicating that this is going to lead to something bad. Nor does her miserable expression in the car help conceal the surprise when Margaret gets all physical with Carrie. Okay, like I said before, I'm glad the gym teacher wasn't stupid enough to just let Carrie walk home like in the original, but wouldn't it have worked better to have suggested calling a cab or something? Or maybe they could have just cut to Margaret and Carrie arriving home without showing the details of her being picked up. That way it could make Margaret's true character reveal look more shocking to those who hadn't seen the original. And look at the creepy Jesus statues in both movies. Yeah, no contest, that thing is an abomination. But it's not to say that the remake is completely inferior in tone to the original. Where it really shines is during the prom massacre. Again, the original is very scary too, it's just a bit cheap looking and doesn't have as much variety. I mean, Carrie mostly just sprays people with levitated hoses and overloads some electrical equipment. The remake has the advantage of being higher budget, allowing for a wider range of more violent destruction. This version has Carrie attacking people with levitating electrical cords, levitating tables, crushing bleachers, parallelism to the ground so they can't get up while people trample them to death, and telekinetically choking people or blasting them across the room. Levitating hoses or levitating electrical wires? Gee, I have no idea which one is more threatening. But then there's the sequence where everyone laughs at Carrie, which led to said massacre, which I think is much more cruel in the original. Let's compare the scenes in both versions. In the remake, the pig blood's dumped on Carrie and everyone goes silent. Then some a-hole plays a video of Carrie freaking out in the locker room, the audience realizes the connection the prank has to the video and starts laughing at poor Carrie. Then the bucket lands on Tommy's head, killing him and shutting everyone up. Carrie's devastated about this and then takes her revenge on the crowd. Okay, that is a pretty tragic scene, but let's look at how sick it is in the original. So at first, rinse and repeat, the blood's dumped on poor Carrie, everyone's petrified, the bucket lands on Tommy's head killing him, and then everyone starts laughing their asses off. Yup, you are seeing this correctly, folks. Apparently the pig blood wasn't enough for these assholes. It took Carrie's lover dying right in front of her in an undignified manner to get a reaction from them. And it's not just the students in this version, it's also the adults like the principal and even the gym teacher. Yup, Carrie's supportive maternal figure has turned traitor on her. We also get a better perspective of the pain Carrie is feeling in the original, with Carrie remembering her mother's prophecy about everyone laughing at her, and the gym teacher's broken promise that she could count on her, on top of her vision going all surreal, indicating that her intense misery is also reducing her sanity. So to wrap things up, it's not to say that I found the tone of the new movie bad per se. Like I said before, it was right to tone down the cruelty of the bullying for modern audiences, and it also made some of the other characters more likable. Hell, even though I like the original Margaret better, I am honestly glad that Julianne Moore tried to give her own more gentle take on the character instead of just rehashing Laurie's performance. But again, not having to worry as much about social norms really gave the original a lot more leeway to showcase the conflict of the bullying. They portray a world that almost entirely lacks compassion and empathy, not like something from South Park or Family Guy. So by the time the prom massacre happens, it's almost impossible to feel sorry for these assholes. So a combination of that, and having a better sense of how it portrayed scares, really gave the original an advantage of setting a stronger and more suspenseful mood for the movie, which made it the iconic horror classic and first Stephen King adaptation that everyone remembers to this day. Point goes to the old, winning the match.
What the hell?